You're standing at your kitchen counter, coffee in hand, and your phone lights up. 11:11. You smile, almost reflexively, because this isn't the first time today. In fact, it's the third, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a question forms that you've been avoiding for weeks now. Why does this keep happening to me? But here's what's actually happening, and I need you to hear this clearly. That question you just asked isn't coming from curiosity, it's coming from recognition. Your consciousness already knows the answer, your logical mind is just catching up. And that gap, that space between what you know and what you think you know, is exactly where transformation lives. I'm not here to tell you you're special. I'm not here to convince you that you're chosen by some cosmic lottery. What I am here to do is show you the mechanics of what's already operating in your awareness, whether you acknowledge it or not. Because the truth is, you didn't find this video by accident. The algorithm didn't randomly suggest it. You're here because your consciousness is actively seeking the framework to make sense of patterns you've been experiencing but haven't had language for. And over the next several minutes I'm going to give you that language, not as mystical poetry, not as vague inspiration, but as a practical operating system for navigating what's happening in your awareness right now. Before we go any further, if you felt even a flicker of recognition in what I just said, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel right now. Not because I need the numbers, but because what we're about to explore requires consistency. This isn't a one-video revelation, it's a framework that builds, deepens, and evolves. And if you're serious about understanding the mechanics of your own consciousness, you'll want access to every piece of this puzzle as it unfolds. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's continue. Let me start with something concrete. You know how sometimes you think of a person you haven't spoken to in months, and within hours they text you? Or how you've been considering a career change, and suddenly 3 different people mention opportunities in that exact field within the same week? Most people call this coincidence, some call it synchronicity, but neither of those words actually explains the mechanism. They're just labels we put on experiences we don't understand. So let me give you the actual framework. Your consciousness operates on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Think of it like a radio. At any given moment, you're tuned to a primary station, let's call it your default frequency. This is where most of your daily awareness lives. You're thinking about tasks, responding to emails, having surface-level conversations, moving through routines. But here's what most people don't realize. While you're tuned to that primary frequency, your consciousness is also scanning dozens of other channels in the background. You're picking up information, patterns, possibilities that your logical mind isn't actively processing. And every now and then, something on one of those background channels becomes so relevant, so aligned with what you need, that it breaks through into your primary awareness. That's what you experience as synchronicity. But it's not random. It's not the universe magically delivering messages. It's your own expanded consciousness feeding relevant data to your logical mind through the only channel it recognizes, your 5 senses. When you see 11:11, when you think of someone and they call, when opportunities appear exactly when you need them, you're not experiencing external intervention, you're experiencing internal coordination. Different layers of your own awareness communicating with each other. Now, why does this matter? Because once you understand this mechanism, you stop being a passive observer of synchronicities and become an active architect of them. You learn to tune your primary frequency intentionally. You learn to recognize which background channels are feeding you the most relevant information, and most importantly, you learn to act on that information before your logical mind talks you out of it. Let me give you a real example. A few months ago, I was working with someone, we'll call him David, who kept seeing the number sequence 444. every day, multiple times, on clocks, on receipts, in random places. He asked me what it meant, expecting some mystical interpretation. Instead, I asked him a different question. What are you usually thinking about when you see it? He paused, then said, Actually, I'm almost always thinking about whether I should quit my job and start my own business. There it was. His expanded consciousness was using 444 as a confirmation signal, a way of saying, yes, this thought you keep having, pay attention to it. This is the direction of your highest alignment. 3 weeks after that conversation, David gave his notice. 6 months later, his business was generating more than his salary ever did. Not because 444 was a magic number, but because he learned to read his own consciousness correctly. Now let's go deeper into how these frequencies actually work, because this is where most spiritual content falls apart. It gives you the poetry, but not the mechanics. So here's the mechanics. Human consciousness operates across a spectrum. On one end, you have what I call survival frequency. This is where your awareness is completely absorbed in immediate physical needs, threats, and basic emotional reactions. When you're in survival frequency, you're reactive. Everything is happening to you, and you're just trying to keep up. Most of humanity operates here most of the time, not because they're unaware or unconscious, but because modern life is specifically designed to keep people in this frequency. Constant notifications, endless scrolling, manufactured urgency. It all serves to keep your awareness locked at the survival end of the spectrum, but on the other end of that spectrum, you have what I call coherence frequency. This is where your awareness expands beyond immediate survival concerns and starts perceiving patterns, connections, and possibilities that don't exist in survival mode. When you're in coherence frequency, information flows differently, decisions become clearer, creative solutions appear seemingly out of nowhere, your sense of time changes, you stop feeling rushed and start feeling aligned. And here's the key detail that changes everything. Coherence frequency isn't something you have to earn or unlock through years of meditation. It's already accessible to you right now. You've experienced it before, probably multiple times. Those moments when everything just clicks, when you're in flow, when ideas come faster than you can capture them, that's coherence frequency. The problem is, most people don't know how to access it intentionally. They stumble into it randomly, enjoy it while it lasts, then drop back into survival mode without understanding what happened. So how do you access coherence frequency intentionally? It starts with recognizing the difference between complexity and clarity. Survival frequency loves complexity. It thrives on overthinking, analyzing every variable, creating endless pros and cons lists. Coherence frequency operates on clarity. It sees the essential pattern immediately and acts from that recognition. Let me show you what this looks like practically. Imagine you're facing a decision, any decision. In survival frequency, you approach it by gathering more information. You ask 10 different people for advice. You research for hours. You create spreadsheets comparing options. And after all that, you still feel uncertain because complexity doesn't lead to clarity. It leads to paralysis. But in coherence frequency, you approach the same decision completely differently. You get quiet. You ask yourself one simple question: which option feels like expansion and which feels like contraction? And your body answers immediately. Expansion feels light, open, energized. Contraction feels heavy, closed, draining. That's it. That's the entire decision-making process in coherence frequency, and it works because your expanded consciousness, the part of you scanning all those background channels, already knows which option aligns with your highest trajectory. It's feeding that information to you through sensation. You just have to trust it enough to act on it. Now, let's talk about why numbers keep appearing in your awareness, because this is where the mechanics get really interesting. Numbers aren't mystical codes sent from angels or ascended masters. They're the language your logical mind uses to recognize patterns. When your expanded consciousness wants to communicate something to your logical mind, it can just speak directly because your logical mind doesn't process intuitive information. It needs something concrete, something visible, something repeatable. So it uses numbers. Specifically, it uses repeated number sequences because repetition is how your logical mind learns to pay attention. Think about how you learned anything in life. Repetition. You didn't learn to walk by trying once. You fell, got up, fell again, got up again, until the pattern became automatic. Your consciousness uses the same mechanism. When you see 1111 once, your logical mind barely registers it. But when you see it 3 times in one day, your logical mind starts paying attention. And when you see it consistently over weeks, your logical mind begins to ask, what does this mean? And that question, that curiosity, is the opening your expanded consciousness needs to feed you more refined information. But here's what most people get wrong. They think the number itself has inherent meaning. They search online for what does 1111 mean, and find a dozen different interpretations. Portal opening, angel message, twin flame connection, spiritual awakening, and all of that might be partially true, but it's missing the fundamental point. The number doesn't have universal meaning. It has personal meaning. The meaning is in what you were thinking, feeling, or experiencing when you saw it. That's the message, not the number. The number is just the delivery system. So instead of asking, what does this number mean, start asking, what was I engaged with when this number appeared? That's where the actual information lives. And once you start tracking that, once you start noticing the correlation between the numbers you see and the thoughts you're having, you begin to recognize your own consciousness patterns. You begin to, not mystical signs, but practical feedback from your own expanded awareness. Now we need to address something that's probably been building in your awareness as you've been watching this. A sense of recognition. A feeling that what I'm describing isn't new information but remembered information, and that feeling is correct. What I'm giving you isn't knowledge you're learning for the first time, it's knowledge you're remembering, and that distinction is everything, because learning implies you're acquiring something external, remembering implies you're activating something internal, something that's been dormant, waiting for the right catalyst to bring it online. This is what's actually happening when people talk about awakening or activation. It's not that you're becoming something you weren't before. It's that you're remembering capacities you've always had but forgot how to access. And the remembering process isn't passive. It requires engagement. It requires you to take what you're recognizing and apply it. Test it. Verify it in your own experience. Because remembered knowledge without application remains dormant. It's only through direct experience that dormant knowledge becomes active capacity. So here's your first activation protocol. Over the next 7 days, I want you to do something specific every single time you notice a repeated number sequence. It doesn't matter which sequence. 1111, 222, 333, 4444. The number isn't important. What matters is your response to it. The moment you see a repeated number, stop whatever you're doing. Take 3 deep breaths. Then ask yourself these 3 questions. First, what was I thinking about 30 seconds before I saw this number? Second, does that thought feel like expansion or contraction in my body? Third, if this number is confirming alignment, what's my next immediate action? Notice, I'm not asking you to interpret the number. I'm asking you to use it as a trigger for self-inquiry. And then, and this is critical, whatever action comes through that inquiry, you take it within 24 hours. not next week, not when it's convenient. Within 24 hours, because the gap between recognition and action is where most people lose momentum. They recognize something true, they feel the alignment, and then they wait, they overthink it, they talk themselves out of it, and the activation that was trying to occur gets aborted. So you close the gap. Recognition, inquiry, action, that's the sequence. And when you do this consistently for 7 days, you'll begin to notice something shifting in how information flows to you. Synchronicities increase. Clarity becomes more consistent. Decision-making gets faster and more accurate, not because the universe changed, because you learn to work with your own consciousness architecture deliberately. But let's be honest about something. If this was easy, everyone would be doing it, and clearly they're not. So what's the interference? What stops people from operating in coherence frequency consistently? It's not lack of information. You have access to more spiritual teachings, frameworks, and techniques than any generation in human history. The interference isn't external, it's internal, and it comes in 3 specific forms. First interference is identity attachment. You have a deeply ingrained sense of who you are based on your history, your personality, your roles, your beliefs, and that identity is invested in maintaining itself. So when you start accessing coherence frequency, when you start operating from expanded awareness, your old identity perceives it as a threat, and it activates defense mechanisms, doubt, skepticism, self-sabotage. It whispers, who are you to think you can trust your intuition? What if you're wrong? What if you're delusional? And if you don't recognize these as identity defense patterns, you'll mistake them for legitimate concerns and retreat back to survival frequency. Second interference is consensus reality, the collective agreement about what's real, what's possible, and how life works. From birth, you've been conditioned to trust external authority over internal knowing. Doctors, teachers, experts, data, proof. And there's value in that when you're navigating physical reality. But when you're working with consciousness, external validation is often irrelevant or misleading. Consciousness operates on principles that can't be measured empirically, can't be proven in double-blind studies, can't be verified by anyone except you. So if you're waiting for permission from consensus reality to trust your own awareness, you'll wait forever. Third interference is energetic environment. You're not operating in a vacuum. You're surrounded by other people's frequencies, other people's beliefs, other people's emotional states. And if you're not consciously managing your energetic boundaries, you'll absorb those frequencies without realizing it. You'll walk into a room feeling clear and aligned, and walk out feeling confused and drained, and have no idea what happened. This is why most traditional spiritual practices emphasize solitude, retreat, withdrawal from the world. Because they recognize that maintaining coherence frequency in the middle of chaotic environments requires significant skill. But here's what's different now. You don't need to withdraw. You don't need to isolate. What you need is discernment. The ability to recognize which environments, which relationships, which information sources support your coherence and which degrade it. And then the willingness to make choices accordingly. Not from judgment, not from superiority, but from simple recognition that your frequency is your responsibility and you get to choose what you expose yourself to. So we've covered the mechanics, frequency spectrum, pattern recognition, activation protocols, interference patterns. Now we need to talk about integration, because understanding something intellectually and embodying it practically are 2 completely different processes. You can watch 100 videos about consciousness, you can read 1,000 books, you can attend workshops and retreats and ceremonies, And all of that can give you beautiful insights, profound experiences, temporary states of clarity, but none of it matters if you don't integrate it into your daily life, if it doesn't change how you show up in ordinary moments. Integration is where most people fail, not because they don't have access to truth, but because they don't bridge the gap between knowing and being. Integration requires repetition, not the repetition of affirmations or mantras, but the repetition of aligned action. Every time you choose coherence over reactivity, you're integrating. Every time you trust your internal knowing over external opinion, you're integrating. Every time you act on recognition within 24 hours instead of waiting for perfect conditions, you're integrating. And the more you integrate, the more your baseline frequency shifts. What used to require conscious effort becomes automatic. What used to feel risky becomes natural. You stop trying to access coherence frequency and start living from it. But integration also requires honesty. Brutal, uncomfortable honesty about where you're still operating from survival patterns, even though you know better. About where you're still seeking external validation, even though you've experienced internal knowing. About where you're still making choices from fear, even though you've felt what alignment feels like. This honesty isn't about self-judgment, it's about accuracy. You can't shift a pattern you won't acknowledge. And most people would rather maintain a spiritual self-image than admit where they're still stuck. But that self-image is just another form of identity attachment, another interference pattern, and it will block your integration until you're willing to see yourself clearly. So here's where we are. You've been given a framework, not a belief system, not a spiritual path, but a practical operating system for working with your own consciousness deliberately. The question now isn't whether this is true. The question is whether you're willing to test it, to apply it, to verify it in your own direct experience. Because that's the only verification that matters, not my authority, not anyone else's testimony, your own lived experience. If what I've shared resonates, if you felt recognition rather than learning, then your next move is simple. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because this framework builds. Each video adds another layer, another protocol, another refinement. And leave a comment below sharing one specific synchronicity you've experienced recently, not to prove anything, not to perform spirituality, to practice articulating your own experience. Because the act of putting recognition into words strengthens neural pathways, makes the pattern more conscious, more accessible, more integrated. And if you're ready to go deeper than what's available publicly, there's a membership option where we work with these principles in real time. Live sessions, advanced protocols, direct feedback. But that's optional. Everything you need to begin is already in what you've received here. The only thing required now is your willingness to act on it. So take the activation protocol I gave you. 7 days, every repeated number, 3 questions, immediate action. Do that and report back what happens, because I guarantee something will shift, not because I said so, but because that's how consciousness works when you engage with it deliberately. You're not here by accident, but you're also not here because you're special. You're here because you're ready. And readiness is the only qualification required, so let's see what you're actually capable of when you stop waiting for permission and start trusting what you already know. I'll see you in the next one.